limits, man. Whoa. Okay, calm down.
I've had a lot of colleagues through the years who grew up in South Africa and who lived the reality of apartheid. And it really becomes, deeply ingrained, that consciousness of justice and injustice, I have to say. So there is something very poetic about the fact that this case was brought by South Africa. Of all of the countries in the world, if I think about it, I can't think of one I'd prefer to be the one bringing this particular case to the court. Yeah.
It's a wonderful testament, the dignity, the eloquence, but it's also ironic because the state of Palestine did not bring the case. It was South Africa, not the quote unquote state of the people of Gaza, who brought the case to the International Court of Justice. There was more heart and more sympathy by the people of South Africa for the people of Gaza than their own state. Such a sad, I mean, it's wonderful, but it's also such a sad, sad commentary.
And what a shaming of all of these grandstanding countries of the West who pretended for decades to be the spokespersons of international law and international human rights, and who are both empowered and required by international law to take this kind of an action. And yet it was South Africa who had to stand up and do it. And not just to do it, but do it against the opposition of powerful Western states. And no doubt with some cost, ultimately, for having taken that courageous stand. And it's many people have commented, and I've been saying this for some time as well, that it really is international law and international institutions themselves that are on trial at this moment in history. And just as South Africa has reached out a helping hand to the Palestinian people by bringing this case, they have also, intentionally or otherwise, saved the court and saved international law in real respect, because the credibility, the legitimacy of these institutions and these laws has been so strained by double standards and hypocrisy and abuse by powerful states around the world. And how amazing that it was the survivors of apartheid and the South African so-called rainbow nation that stood up and said, hey, this system is worth something, and did something about it. The only other country I can think of that's gone to bat like this is Houthi Yemen. Houthi Yemen.
Oh,
yeah. In this particular case.
Yeah. In this case, Yemen, yeah.
I want the closest analog during the 1970s was when Cuba intervened in South Africa and delivered a major defeat of the South African government. So that's one example. I did want to comment on what you just said. All those Europeans with their smug superiority about European civilization and human rights and the dignity of man, and citing all of these precedents, historical precedents, philosophical precedents. And then when the moment of truth came, who stood by the people of Gaza? It was the Houthis, who look like they're a throwback to the Dark Ages with their daggers and their robes, but they threw down the gauntlet to the whole world.
Yeah.
There will be no business as usual while the people of Gaza are being subjected to a genocide. You want to carry on your commerce? You want to carry on your trade? You want to pretend as if nothing is happening? The Houthis said, it's not going to happen. There won't be trade. There won't be commerce, at least in our neighborhood. At least in our neighborhood. Those primitive, backward Houthis showed more moral enlightenment more compassion than all of those civilized European countries. It's a real, if you look at it closely, there's a wonderful movie here.
There is
And there's a lot of moral insight here about all this talk about civilization, enlightenment versus backwardness and primitivity. And there's a story here.
And that's not the end of the story either. Oh, sorry, Katie. I don't want to interrupt you.
When Gandhi was asked about European civilization, he said it's a nice
It's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, Norm, you wrote a book on him, but yeah.
But that's not even the end of the story, because so it was the Houthis who stepped up and they said, I'm going to interfere with ships that are going to be going to the perpetrator regime. And then, what happened in return? This country that had suffered the same horrible onslaught, supported by the West, perpetrated by the Saudis, but supported by the West, an embargo and merciless bombing
under both presidents,
under
Trump and Biden, and Obama too,
and that was suffering from the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet before the Gaza crisis began, and then took this action without killing anybody. And the response of the West, the Americans and its allies, was to bomb the hell out of Yemen for daring to stand up to try to do its duty under international law, by the way, to prevent genocide.
And non-violently, they didn't kill anyone.
In the 1990s, all the rage was this thing called R2P, responsibility to protect.
Yeah.
That was the whole talk of the liberals. Responsibility, that is to intervene where a genocide is happening. Guess what? The only ones who took that R2P seriously, responsibility to protect, were the Houthis.
Yeah.
What they're doing is exactly what liberals said you should do. Responsibility to protect. I developed a real warm spot in my heart for them, because they said, you're not going to scare us. You're not going to stop us. As long as the people in Gaza are subjected to a genocide, we won't stop. Could you imagine what do you know all the praise that's given to the Danes, the Danish government, because it helped evacuate Jews during World War II. But is there a case, because that was Danish Jews, it was Denmark, where a totally distant people did that for the people of Gaza? If I were to give a Nobel Peace Prize, I would give it to three. I would divide it between three. Number one, the South African delegation. Number two, those doctors who volunteered to go to Gaza. It's a really amazing story. Anywhere in the world, to be a medical doctor is a ticket to a very easy life. And these doctors, the Doctors Without Borders and others, one doctor, he was Palestinian. He was asked, he had all these degrees. He had, he one of those folks who he was asked, why don't you leave? Because he had the option. He was able to go. He said, I didn't go to medical school for 30 years to abandon my people.
I think this one was killed. This one you're talking about.
Yes, he was killed. He was killed. So number two, the doctors, not to trivialize anybody else's life, but they volunteered. It was a suicide mission. Even Abu Sita, who survived, he wrote his own obituary. He thought he was going to get killed, but he did manage to get out. And the third, it's the Houthis. They're the third winners in a real Nobel Peace Prize. If genocide is the crime of crimes, as it's called, then I say the Houthis are the hero of heroes.
If you're looking for heroes, all you have to do is to peek into Gaza on any day and see the selflessness and the courage and the dignity of people who are watching their sisters and brothers and mothers and fathers being cut down in the goriest ways all around them every single day, and yet they go into the rubble and they go and they walk behind the wall to rescue the person that's being shot by the sniper, or the doctors, the Palestinian doctors and nurses who stay in those hospitals as they are under siege and being attacked, and the journalists who continue to cover the story, knowing that one by one they're intentionally being followed by drones and assassinated in order to silence them, and they keep on reporting. You have never seen a concentration of heroism.
Not only them, their families.
And their families
targeted,
killed along with them.
The families of the journalists are targeted for death. I'll tell you, during the first Intifada, I was in a refugee camp. It's called Jalazon. Okay? And we were meeting people there. And as we were leaving, there was a burning tire on the road. That was one of the forms of revolt. The Palestinian young people, kids, would burn tires on the road. The soldiers came and they started to shoot. And they shot a kid in the back and he fell. I was with 3 other people. 2 of them are now, one of them is a retired professor, the other is a professor at Columbia, and another person, a photographer. We were all terrified. Terrified. The soldiers are shooting. The kid fell, and we're hugging the wall. You know what happens? All these old Palestinian women, large, they rush out of the camp to get the kid. You know? They rush to get the kid, and all the bullets are flying. You know, it's one of those moments where it's very humbling. It's very humbling. The selflessness, the courage, just like what was just said, in the midst of the bombing, in the midst of the killing, to go amidst the rubble, to get your kids out or get people out.
Let me say this, Norman, because you're making my heart flutter here. I also was in Gaza during the first Intifada, monitoring human rights violations, and I had similar experiences, and one of them that's tattooed on my mind, and it tells you what the people of Gaza are like, what the people of Palestine are like. There was a curfew, and the jeeps of the Israeli soldiers were buzzing around as they do, shooting at everything that moves at the time. And I was there with my interpreter and stuck out on the street in the refugee camp, and not knowing, we had no idea what to do. We had to get out of sight. And you know what the curfews were like in those days. You step out of the door and you're taking your life into your own hands. And suddenly, like out of nowhere, this family ushered us into their little 1.5 room hovel, their refugee shelter in the refugee camp in Gaza. And this curfew had been going on for a long time. We had come in through the back way to try to, monitor the situation. And I remember this family, they had one like plastic, like Pepsi bottle full of water, and they didn't know when they were going to be able to go out. And there was like the children and the parents and the grandparents, all is common. I remember they had one decoration in the entire place, which was a poster of Bruce Springsteen, a worn poster of Bruce Springsteen. Where it came from, I don't know. And they used that water to make tea for us, and they sheltered us. And they brought us in at risk. They a whole family. They used their one plastic Pepsi bottle of water to make make tea for us, and then kept us there safe until it was okay for us to leave. And that's just one of so many of those stories that you encounter when you're there. I mean, the most amazing thing is the way that these people go through horror after horror, military attack after military attack, deprivation after deprivation, indignity after indignity, and yet they maintain this sort of grace and this capacity to live and to love and to laugh and to, and so to see what's happening now, that every place that I have visited in my trips to Gaza, or when I lived there for 2 years in the 90s, it's all gone. It's all been razed to the ground. Ramallah, Gaza City, one of the oldest cities in the world, what is it, like 1500 BC, is gone. And then to have a total brownout in the Western media about what is happening there, about the genocide, facilitated by the media and by politicians and others, and people on social media saying the most cold-blooded things about what's happening on the ground. You just wonder about humanity in the West. And compared to what I experienced there, it's not humanity at all.
I'm not as pessimistic about ordinary people, people in power, but ordinary people. What is the poll now that 1/3 of Americans think
believe it's genocide?
That's it's kind of impressive.
Well, yeah, absolutely. This is the repository of hope. Is definitely, it's those people in the streets. It's those people demonstrating, those people standing up, those people, absolutely. But you're right. The people in power seem to have, and it's not just the people in power. There are legions of people out there who are cheering this thing on, and angrily. And that's scary. I mean, that's a scary thought, that there are people amongst us who are that sort of, their souls are that numb,
I don't want to be Pollyannish about it. I recognize that. But I'm still astonished at all of the outpouring of support, in particular by young Jews.
Absolutely. That's the most amazing thing.
I never thought I would live to see the day where a large majority of young Jews think I'm a liberal Zionist.
By comparison.